Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll talk about a 12-year-old arrested for doodling. We'll also be talking about police who robbed a pharmacy in Australia, the Downsizer Dispatch, and a whole lot more. All coming up tonight, right here on Free Minds TV.
Welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It is episode 145, and as always, it is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
We are going to be getting into some stories from around the United States in the second half of tonight's show, but first I wanted to pick on some other parts of the world. I mean, it makes our situation here in the U.S. look a little less dire, a little less depressing, if we look at other governments around the world who have it worse off.
It's also important to keep things in perspective, and the fact of the matter is that a lot of people in other countries have things a whole lot worse when it comes to government overstepping its bounds. Not that we don't have, a host of our own problems here in the United States, but there's a lot of countries where it's worse off to live if you're somebody who cares about freedom.
Yes, while we don't have it perfect here in the United States, and it's going in the wrong direction if you ask me, it could always be worse. We will be bringing it back to the United States, but first, I wanted to go over to China. Yes, China, they really don't believe in civil liberties over there. It's a group mentality, group think, all for one, and all for the government. Well, it looks like the latest step they're doing over in China after banning the internet, essentially, or censoring it, banning pornography, and looks like now they're going after your cell phone and text messaging. Yes, China is now going to be censoring all text messages. It looks like the government-owned telecom operators are going to be censoring all vulgar or indecent text messages that are coming through. And now we're talking about...
Well, presumably they'd have to read them.
Yes, well, you're going to have some kind of a system to either read their text message, read these text messages, or just filter out certain words. Maybe there will be words that flag certain text messages to be read further. But we are talking about censoring over 6 billion text messages per year. I mean, that was at least the recorded number in 2008. 6 billion different text messages being sent that will now have to be filtered through and censored because China, well, their government just wouldn't want people texting whatever they want, especially if it's vulgar or indecent text messages. Now, they are very happy about their previous campaigns, even though Google maybe not. We've reported on news that Google is threatening to pull out of China because of all their censorship and forced requirements on China to censor. But it's not stopping China. They are actually saying that this campaign is coming because their anti-smut campaign has been so successful. Yes, they have banned more than 87 million websites and shut down an additional 15,000 pornographic websites. So they're saying that this is just the next step in teaching people how to live their lives.
Well, see, what isn't mentioned here is how many of those websites are still open.
Right. Well, I'm sure. I mean, there's definitely billions and billions of pornographic websites, or maybe billions. I don't know how many billions, but it is in the billions number, and they've only shut down 87 million. So you're right. They're not actually completely going to be able to do this, Nick. But I mean, it is kind of scary to think about that the government is able to do this. And it's not just these websites that they're, of course, people know that they pretty much censor all parts of the internet. It's not just vulgar pornographic parts. I mean, it gets into all different
Well, largely,
aspects.
I mean, I think the Chinese government is mostly concerned about political dissent. They might be cracking down somewhat on pornography or on foul language, but they certainly also crack down when there's discussion about protests being suppressed in Tibet or relations with Taiwan. Things that could be embarrassing for the Chinese government, things where the Chinese government is taking a position that is not necessarily supported by the Chinese people. They don't really want to be open to that kind of criticism. It's a lot easier to run, a somewhat totalitarian state. China actually is somewhat more lenient than it was in years past. In years past, they probably would not have allowed the internet, but they just don't have any real means to keep it out at this point.
And they do it in such nice ways. They have these little police pop-up ads that come up if you're at a site that you maybe shouldn't be at.
I mean, not that, certainly, I'm not making...
So nice. It's a little cartoon. He pops up onto your screen and says, "Are you sure you should be here?" And
but there was a time during where ideological impurity in China meant getting shot in the back of the head. It still can today if you're a big enough threat to the government, but It's not like it was back during the days of the Cultural Revolution in China, where millions and millions of people died, out of a pursuit of perfecting communist ideology. It's not quite as bad today as it was in years past, but compared to what we have here in the United States, it's certainly not a place where you can expect to have a right to free expression.
Yeah, well, you might not be losing your life anymore. You're certainly not living a full life with a censored media, censored internet, censored text messages. I mean, how can anyone say that would be a full life if the government?
And there's still a good chance you're going to go to jail or be punished in some
there's
other way if you are
political
critical
dissenters
of the
who are behind bars over in China, and journalists and all sorts of people. So important to think about. It could always be worse. I mean, while it's definitely not perfect here in the United States, at least the government isn't yet censoring our internet and censoring our text messages. I mean, I don't think that it's that far off. I mean, they're certainly reading out what we're doing on the internet. They're certainly monitoring it, certainly monitoring text messages and telephone calls, but at least thus far, still allowed to do it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be vigilant, though, because easily, even in Western governments, they can do this. And now we can go over to Australia, another government that's kind of going in the same direction of China, that we're going to be focusing on next. Before we move on to the story, I wanted to point out that they are, in fact, trying to censor their internet and restrict what their citizenry are seeing. And that's a Western government that's doing that. So a lot of people think, well, this is happening in China. We're westernized thinkers. We're much more advanced. We have free speech. Couldn't happen here. Well, Australia is already doing it. So it's not that far off. But that's not the subject of this next article. Something about robbing a pharmacy by police officers.
Well, yeah, the thing that makes the censorship of the internet in Australia scary is the fact that they have a culture that's very similar to ours. So I think they're an English-speaking country. Their legal system's based on English tradition. It's very similar to the United States in many ways. And this story points out that, police corruption, that's nothing that's unique to the United States either. Queensland police are in trouble again, accused of dressing as bandits to stage a prank robbery, leading to a tense gunpoint standoff with undercover detectives. The incident is under investigation in the latest setback for the Gold Coast Police region, already reeling from allegations of drug-related corruption. Not entirely surprising to me. This is something that happens here in the United States as well. And I want to point out, as much as we talk about the corrupting influence that the war on drugs has on the police forces, not just here in the United States, but all over the world, it is important to point out that not every police officer is corrupt. Not every police officer is taking bribes or skimming drug money off the side when they are involved in a raid, or robbing the pharmacy with their friends as a joke. Not every police officer does it, but I think there is certainly corruption and abuse that takes place within police forces here in the United States and around the world that's more than occasional. It's not just one or two bad apples. I think that it is systemic to a certain extent, and especially when you get involved with vice crimes, things like the war on drugs, I think it actually makes matters a whole lot worse. It puts a whole lot more money on the table, and when money gets involved, well, that tends to feed corruption.
Yeah, I think it changes a lot of incentives that people might have out there. I mean, the incentive of locking up a burglary suspect is different than the incentive of busting someone who has $10 million. I mean, it's going in far into the gray area and then going into areas you shouldn't go. But I mean, the incentives definitely change when you're talking about vice crime.
Yeah, they certainly do. The fake robbery, which involved officers from the Kumara police station in April 2008, is the subject of an ongoing investigation in the Ethical Standards Command, which I assume is something like internal affairs over there. It's one of the ever-increasing number of incidents to attract the attention of the Crime and Misconduct Commission. Now, obviously, they've set up a lot of commissions and commands and review boards. It doesn't really seem to be doing too much to address police corruption. The police service was rocked last week with allegations of drug dealing involving several Gold Coast officers, a story that is the subject of a CMC inquiry. Since then, allegations have emerged of a culture among some junior officers of bribery and standover tactics. It was revealed on Saturday, so obviously this is all one police force in one area of Australia. It was revealed on Saturday that 2 officers from the Gold Coast Liquor Licensing Squad were suspended for allegedly taking bribes. And it goes on here. But apparently, a handful of police officers decided that they would dress up as robbers and go into a pharmacy that was under surveillance by detectives who were looking into cases of pharmacies being robbed by people with guns. And, well, these police, I guess they didn't actually take anything. They started to leave, pretending it was a botched robbery, but the detectives really weren't in on the joke. They didn't know it was a joke. It was a prank. And the detectives ended up pulling guns on these police officers who were really, whether it was a joke or not,
well,
it's still a criminal offense.
They committed the crime either way. Now, Nick, this doesn't seem like a case of police corruption so much as it does police stupidity. I mean,
it's a crime.
Yeah, it just seems more like stupidity than anything else. People thinking that they're going to be doing something funny when they're doing something completely stupid.
It's different.
It's different. It's
criminally stupid.
Yeah, but Nick, I think this is different than the kind of corruption we're talking about, where someone busts in a house, sees $10 million there, pockets $5 million of it, and then turns over the other half and says, well, there was only $5 million to begin with. That's different than the corruption of just doing something completely stupid and asinine because you think it's going to be funny, a funny prank. I mean, I think this is just stupidity. I mean,
yeah, but if I put together a prank like this, I'd be in jail, wouldn't I?
Yeah, and I think that they should be as well. I mean, people could have gotten killed here. Bystanders
and
could have gotten killed.
I mean,
police officers.
If you really want to address
killed.
police corruption and abuses, I think what you need to do is have equality under the law, which is what we're supposed to have here, at least in the United States. If a police officer commits a crime, a lot of times you'll hear, well, it was a technical violation of the law. No, when you or I commit a crime,
that's what they're looking at, is the technical aspects.
The prosecutor's not going to call it, you technically broke the law.
Right.
They're going to prosecute you.
Yeah.
And police officers should be prosecuted in exactly the same way that everyday folk are when they do something like this. But they're not, because really they're officers of the court. They work for the court system. So the courts are pretty reluctant to charge them. I mean, in most places, the prosecutor is a police officer.
Right.
So they're not going to charge their own people in the same way that they charge you and me.
Right.
That's
it looks the whole force, even if they don't have a relationship with that person, it makes the whole force and the whole field look bad. I mean, so.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the other side to it here is I'm sure that there are police officers in this area of Australia that are doing their jobs, that are, they are looking out for public safety, they are respecting people's rights, they're not, causing scenes that could be dangerous to public safety or taking bribes on the side for licensing. I'm sure there are plenty of police officers in this jurisdiction who are doing none of those things. They're doing a good job. They're honest cops. But you're not going to make headlines being an honest cop. Just like anything, it's the unusual stories and the stories where something bad is happening that really sell ads. And that's what gets press coverage, because that's what newspapers, TV shows, radio shows try to do. So people are going to focus on the cases of corruption, even if it's not the majority of police officers. It has a way of looking that way to the public, because that's what gets covered.
Okay, Nick. At the same respect, though, I think most police corruption never gets reported because it's not found out about.
Oh, absolutely.
So I always just want to caveat to that. Yes, this one's in the press, but then again, most corruption, be this police corruption or any kind of corruption, we don't ever hear about because people are getting away with it. Anyways, Nick, we do need to move on. It's time to actually point out some good news, bringing it back to the United States before we start crushing on some of the bad things the government's doing here in the U.S. Let's focus in on a victory, some really good news that we've been talking about for years. And you've got the latest. Something great has happened. Something that Downsizer Dispatch has been picking up on.
Right, yeah. Downsizer DC is talking about the National Animal ID system, and the fact of the matter is it's been killed. For 4 years, DC Downsizers joined with other organizations and a lot of farmers to oppose the National Animal Identification System. Now, the U.S. has finally seen the light. They're scrapping National Animal ID, which is a great thing because it would have been burdensome not only to commercial farmers, but also to anybody who owns, say, one chicken as a pet, one pig. And let's be honest, we're broadcasting here. Most of our viewers are in the state of New Hampshire. We've got some over in Maine. This is a pretty rural area. So chances are a lot of people out there watching, you might have an animal, or you might have thought about getting an animal. Even if it's just one chicken, just one pig, National Animal ID would have required you to chip it with an RFID chip and report any time that animal left your property for any reason. Animal owners, under this new system, there is a new system being proposed here, but it's going to be a lot less restrictive than National Animal ID would have been. Under the new system, animal owners won't have to file a report every time an animal leaves their property, whereas under National Animal ID, horseback riders, for instance, would have had to file a report every time they went for a ride. There will be no premises registration under this new system. Even if you only have one animal, you'd have to register the animal, and you'd have to register your premises, your property where you kept it. Those who raise animals for personal consumption or to sell in local markets won't be part of a new regulatory system. They're also promising, the USDA here is saying that the new system is going to focus entirely on disease traceability. It's not going to have anything to do with terrorism or any of these other bogus arguments. And is not going to apply to anything that's not interstate commerce. So if you don't have animals moving across state lines, this isn't going to affect you. If you're raising chickens in your backyard, you're fine. A farmer who needs to move, a whole bunch of cattle or horses or sheep across a state line, they might get caught up in this new regulatory system that's being proposed, but it's a lot less bad than it could have been. National Animal ID was going to be extremely burdensome for anybody who wanted to own animals, especially small family farms. There is one other piece of legislation that is still out there, though, that we do still need to work on getting killed, and that's H.R. 2749. It's a very burdensome food safety bill that would submit farmers to all kinds of burdensome inspections, regulations, and a whole new system of fines and fees. You can go check out that legislation and decide whether you'd like to tell your representatives to vote against it over at downsizedc.org.
Yes, and there are a whole bunch of other awesome campaigns over there as well.
There's a lot. I mean, it's not just on one area.
So this is
all across
some good news, still some bad news with it. I think it would be better if it was just killed, but it could have been much worse. All right, when we come back, we are going to be talking about some really stupid things the government has been doing, as well as, some other really stupid things the government has been doing. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is Free Minds TV.
Log on to freemindstv.com for archives of the show, the Free Minds Radio podcasts, show content and the forum, ways to donate, the members section, contact info, and a whole lot more, all at freemindstv.com.
Stick in between segments of our show.
Okay, I can do that. All right. Hi there, I'm Russell Canning, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. It is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
We'd like to invite the viewers to log on to our website. freemindsmedia.org is the web address, or freemindstv.com. However you want to get there, there's plenty of different ways. You can even just Google Free Minds TV, and you'll find it. From there are all sorts of wonderful things. You can get not only the archives of the show, there's also the radio side, blogs, the members area, only $3 a month or $30 a year, and a whole lot more. And we would really like to encourage people who enjoy the show to help us out. The recession with the economy and everything has made some of the members fall out, not renew their memberships. So if you are someone out there who enjoys the show, you even want tons of bonus content for it, you can throw us a few bucks up at freemindsmedia.org. All right, Nick, we do need to move along here because we've got a lot more to get to. We are going to be getting into this article about a girl who was arrested for doodling. But first, I wanted to go over to an article coming from New York State of all places, talking about talking on one's cell phone. Now, in New York, back in 2001, they were one of the first states to outlaw the practice of talking on one's cell phone while driving in the car. Well, 9 years later, what has the data shown? Are more people living as a result of this? Has this law that has been passed over in New York saved lives? Well, the jury is in, and the answer is no. Studies have shown that despite 9-year crackdown on talking on one's cell phone while driving in a vehicle has done nothing at all to reduce the amount of accidents or the amount of fatalities. Nothing. They just wasted a lot of money and wasted a lot of people's time. Now, other studies from other parts of the United States are showing the exact same thing, that even though states are banning talking on cell phones, it's not doing anything to prevent accidents. Now, before we talk about this, I think there is one really, really cool-headed police officer that's quoted in this article that we've been saying this whole thing all along, but I'm going to let this come from the mouth of John DeFrancisco, who says, I just generally feel you can't outlaw every little type of activity. It's better to outlaw reckless driving. Oh, wait, that's already outlawed. So there's already a law to outlaw talking on the cell phone and texting and playing with the radio if that's making you swerve across the road. That's called reckless driving. You don't need additional laws. Reckless driving, endangering others, is already on the books, Nick.
Yeah, it's redundant. At the very least, it's redundant. And that's the thing. I mean, I've heard people say, well, I think this ought to be a law.
Well, it's a stupid behavior if you're talking on one cell phone and you can't pay attention to the road. Yes. And if you
can't pay attention, I think texting and driving is pretty distracting. At least for me, I can talk on the cell phone and drive paying attention pretty well. But that's the thing, is even if you think people shouldn't do it, not only do we already have a law that covers this, reckless driving or distracted driving, but the fact of the matter is you're not going to get people to stop. People are not going to stop doing something just because you make it illegal. And say banning texting while driving, that's very difficult to enforce. In fact, to meet a burden of proof, to show that somebody was texting while they were driving beyond a reasonable doubt is going to be exceedingly difficult. For a what can a police officer say? I think I saw you typing on your cell phone. Okay, that's the only evidence?
Wait,
is that enough to
but
convict somebody?
Yeah, like you're talking about here in New Hampshire, they just passed a law outlawing texting. It just went into effect on January 1st. But there's nothing in that law. I haven't read the law, but I don't believe there's stuff about checking, say, the time on your cell phone. So you can pull it out, check the time. Police officer pulls you over. Well, I wasn't texting. I was just checking the time. Or I was looking at my picture here. Or I was using it for a hands-free call. Or I was just talking.
Or what if you're receiving a text message? Because I think some of the laws are probably vague enough. There's different laws in different states. It's probably vague enough that if you get a message and you can read the message, that's not texting while driving. That's just reading something while you're driving.
Or now cell phones have the internet. I was just checking the weather. I was just checking my email. I wasn't text messaging. I was emailing. That's a different category. Anyways, the point is, all of that could be covered under distracted driving or reckless driving. If you're sitting there driving along and you want to switch the radio and it's causing you to swerve into the other lane, well, you're endangering other people. That's reckless driving. If you're talking on the cell phone, nothing's wrong. You're driving just fine. Should you be fined for that? Now, Nick, and this shows different levels of drivers. Different people can handle different things. Maybe I can handle texting on my cell phone, reading the newspaper, and just driving just fine. Stupid idea, but maybe I can handle it. Maybe someone else...
How many people can read the newspaper while they drive?
I've seen it happen. Maybe someone else can't even handle the radio. Just having the radio on is going to put them over the edge.
Tuning the radio is a pretty common source of accidents.
Okay, but there's different levels.
But most people won't say, oh, that should be illegal because everybody does it. And the fact of the matter is that does fall, from what I've heard, that can fall under the distracted driving law.
Well, if you're putting other people's lives in danger, if you're tuning the radio and therefore swerving into the other lane or... That's it's reckless. I mean, you're putting other people's lives in danger.
And recklessly operating a motor vehicle, I think that's a problem.
You need one law. You don't need a myriad of other laws banning this behavior. What about talking to the kids in the back seat? If you have kids in the back seat throwing stuff at you, which is causing you to swerve into the other lane, reckless driving. You can't, if you can't control your kids in the back seat, it's time to pull over, settle them down, and then drive safely. Anyways, by the way, are any of these laws going to be changed?
No, very unlikely.
Even though the studies show that banning the practice of talking on one cell phone in New York and other states hasn't done anything to save anybody, we're still going to continue pulling people over and fining them.
Well, it's revenue for the state.
To me, it's a waste of police officers' time and resources. Yeah. They should be out looking for who's swerving on the road, not who's talking on a cell phone.
But they like an excuse to pull you over, too, because then they can toss your car for drugs or whatever else they want to find.
Well, I think the smart ones know they should be looking out for real crime and people actually endangering others, not just someone who's talking on a cell phone. Let's actually look at the root of the...
A lot of young people have cell phones, and a lot of young people have marijuana.
Yeah, well, you're not doing your job. Protect themselves. Anyways, time to move along. Let's go over to some police I forget where this story is coming from, somewhere in the U.S., where some police officers and school officials were really protecting and serving and keeping us safe from a dangerous, dangerous young 12-year-old girl who was doodling on her desk.
It's coming from Queens, New York. A 12-year-old Queens girl was hauled out of school in handcuffs for doodling. Her name is Alexa Gonzalez. She was scribbling a few words on her desk Monday while waiting for her Spanish teacher to pass out homework at Junior High School 190 in Forest Hills. Apparently she wrote, I love my friends Abby and Faith. Lex was here. 2/1/10, the date. And a smiley face. Now, this was an erasable marker. It wasn't like she carved it in. It wasn't like a permanent marker. You can just wipe this stuff away. But instead of simply cleaning off the doodles after class, Alexa landed in some adult-sized trouble. She was led out of the school in handcuffs by police. She was walked to a police precinct across the street where she was detained for several hours, she and her mother said. And apparently this has been fairly hard on her. It's fairly traumatic. I started crying a lot. She hasn't been back to school, although prior to this she had, I think, perfect attendance, they said, or very close to perfect attendance.
Well, they suspended her for it on top of it as well.
Right.
So, I mean, they didn't only
And she was sentenced.
her.
I don't know what she was actually charged with, but she did go to family court, and she was assigned 8 hours of community service, a book report, and an essay on what she learned from the experience.
I learned that police officers are jerks and can't think for themselves.
I think she
can't have some.
I think she and her
I mean,
mother
what else
should.
is she going to learn from this besides police officers can't use rational judgment? They can't
Well,
use common
it's
sense.
not-
They
it's
can't
not-
approach a
it's
situation and
not-
go,
well,
is this something I
The
should
cops
arrest
are doing
someone
what
for?
they're being asked to do by the schools.
Okay,
And
well,
this
they're
is
not
just-
using common sense. The police officer should go, what? You want me to put this 12-year-old in handcuffs and book her because she doodled on her desk in an erasable marker? Keep her in for recess. Have her wash off the damn desk.
I agree.
That would be common sense police officer.
Well, it seems like the teacher
That's
should
what my
exercise
teacher.
common sense.
Well,
for that.
no, but then the police officer should be the check and balance on this
You would think
overzealous
so.
teacher. Maybe the teacher's having a bad day. She's like, "That's it. You've written on your desk again. I'm calling the police." Well, the police officer who also works for the government can be that check and balance on that teacher. Now, I doodled on my desk. I was busted, Nick, and I had to stay in for recess and wipe
That
it
would
off.
be more appropriate.
I missed recess, and I had to clean my desk. That's what she should have had happen as well.
Well, this is not just her. There's a number of cases we don't have time to get into where the schools are essentially having students arrested for minor infractions. Back in 2008, and this is a New York area school, a five-year-old Dennis Rivera was cuffed and sent to a psych ward after throwing a fit in his kindergarten class.
Well, how big of a fit? You never know. Was he killing people?
He's a 5-year-old. You had to handcuff him and
Did
send
he
him
kill
to a psych
anybody,
ward.
Nick? I
No,
mean-
nobody died, according to this.
Well, you never know. I just got to make sure. Fact check.
If anyone did die, Toby, they omitted it.
All right. Anyways, if you'd like to fact check some of these things, you can log on to our website, freemindsmedia.org. From there, there's a link to the forum where we post all of our show content. So if you don't believe us, you can check the articles for yourselves up at freemindsmedia.org. Well, we are out of time. If you have different opinions, we'd love to hear them. fmtv@freemindsmedia.org is the email address. And until next week, it has been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good one.